The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Directions Mag Geospatial webinar, co-hosted with our friends on the Esri Education team this evening. I'm Barbara Duke, Managing Editor here at Directions Magazine, joined by our assistant webinar producer, Lynette Qualia. If you have any connections, or any issues with your connection, drop us a note in the chat. We'll do our best to help you. We encourage you to read our feature articles, daily news, and of course, catch more webinars, all free at directionsmag.com. We're standing by to take your questions this evening. Just type those in at any time into the question pane. If you see something you like on the screen, you can click the camera button. It'll save an image to your desktop. We are taking information in terms of polls. We also are recording today. So keep an eye on your inbox and we'll be in touch with that information. We also have certificates available for you in that email as well. Like I said, we are happy to have our good friends back this evening, the talented Esri Education team of Charlie, Tom, and Kylie. They are going to talk to us this evening about projects, specifically using data and Survey123. So Charlie, I will hand it over to you to get us started.
Okay, thanks very much, Barbara and Lynette, and hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us, giving us some time. We know that that's the most important and rarest commodity these days. And there were some folks who may have had sort of an unusual idea of what this was going to be about. There was in the registration note, there was an opportunity for people to say what they hoped to learn from this. And so some folks had some extreme ideas of artificial intelligence and remote sensing and all kinds of things. We're really focusing on GIS for projects in K-12 instruction with a special thought to how do you do these things even during COVID when this is students are in all kinds of conditions. Some are all in school, some are all at home, some are this place and that place. So we're going to try to give you a good sense of this, but we want to start by just working down through, because as we looked at this, there were some folks who said, I'm totally new to GIS. So is this, can I use this with schools? So let's just cover a little groundwork here. Esri, we make GIS software. It's called ArcGIS, and there's a whole bunch of pieces of software within that suite, connected suite of tools. And it's all about seeing patterns and relationships, connections between layers of data that we like to say will help people see what others can't. And it gets used in all kinds of industries, and we get to use that. We get to take that very same tool and use it in education. And if you're not familiar with this, some folks have really said, can I use this in schools? Yep, you betcha. Esri.com/schools, that's where you can go to find out a lot of information. Generally speaking, think of it this way, that GIS helps people understand the world, make good decisions, and solve problems. And that's what we want people to do in schools. We want them to do it with some spatial thinking that they can practice in all kinds of arenas using GIS. Now, there are software components and data components and learning resources that are all waiting for people to engage. They're all sitting there free for instructional use by K-12 schools, and it's just the instructional side that gets to use it for free. The administrative side, you guys have to pay for it a little bit, but on the instruction side for schools, it's all free, and that's around the world. So we want people to engage in this stuff, And we see that even from the registration, there are folks from outside the United States that may be chiming in on this. So welcome to you as well. In the United States, there are all kinds of schools that are using these tools, and they're using them in all kinds of ways. They're using them in standard, regular classroom experiences. They're using them in career-focused classes. They're using them in the lower grades all the way up to the senior year. They're doing all kinds of things with it. A lot of them are doing projects. And that's what we wanted to talk about, is projects in K-12 setting, and particularly during this time of COVID, this horrible time. But one of the tools that we're going to use and spend a good chunk of the time on this evening is called Survey123. That's one of the components that is part of the school bundle that all of these red schoolhouses have across the country. And so we wanted to ask a question. So Barbara, if we can pull up that poll, this will be, I think, the right time to get that poll up here. Here we go. All right. Have you used Survey123 in a project? And select one of the 5.
Excellent. So folks are making some selections, and just a reminder for everyone, Charlie and the team will be sharing various links throughout the session this evening, but they have compiled those for you in a handout, and that is available over in your control panel if you would like it right this minute. You can't wait another second for it. So that is available for you. If you don't care to get it right now, we'll send it to you later on in the follow-up email. All right, so we've got some great information here. I'm going to share this.
Ooh, look at this.
Have you used it in a project? 46% say no. And 17% out there are saying, what is Survey123? Fantastic.
Boy, this is just exactly the right event for them. It looks like we got about 1 out of 3 who have been using it successfully in a project. And so that's great. Great to see. So, all right, Tom, if you're ready to walk us into thinking about projects, I'm ready to push on to your slides. Are you ready?
Go ahead. That sounds great. And that poll was really incredible, right? 2/3 of the people really hadn't touched it at all, and 1/3 arguably expert in it. What we want to do is take just a few minutes to stop and think about really the pedagogy that underlies why we're doing what we do with respect to projects. Really, the rest of the evening is going to be focused on the tech tools, and we know there's a big clump of you thinking, oh, we don't need to think about this stuff. We really just want to get in and think about and work with the tools. And the reason we do this, the reason we stop for a moment to think about design, is because it, like many things in life, is a case where an ounce of prevention is, worth 100 pounds of cure. If we stop ahead of time and think about things, get our ducks in a row, as it were, we can avoid some substantial problems as we start using the technology, let alone as students start interacting with our tools. And by that, I mean the products that you have made, the learning products that you've made for your kids to engage. So I've got a couple bullets here. We'll be very brief, but generally we need to approach projects, especially when they're technology heavy, with at least a backwards based design, at least at a minimum. And what that really means is starting by outlining your instructional goals. And good teachers do this anyway. Whether they actually articulate them or not ahead of any given learning experience, they know what the goal is they're after. In this particular case, though, it becomes helpful to clearly articulate it, because by stating what the goal is, it helps direct the final assessment that you want those kids to engage in, whether it's creating a portfolio, maybe through a story map, or creating a product, or responding to a test or quiz. These things can help us articulate the rest of the design of the instruction. Once we understand a goal and how we ultimately want to assess it, then we really need to start framing the design, and we do that by identifying a research question. Now, this can be research with a small r, right? We have students of all ages and all capacities and interests here, and understand that not everybody is going to run out and do, say, trace gas sampling or something. Some students are going to be completely appropriate to go out and measure the anthills in the backyard. There's a range of things that are valid research questions that students can engage in. And typically, as a starting point, it's appropriate for a teacher to identify, at least the first few times out, the question that the student should be adhering to as they study their natural world. Of course, as educators, we always know audience is critical, and that's not just age and learning experiences, but that also includes, in the age of COVID, what does their home technical capacity look like, as well as what does their home support system look like, especially if you're doing something brand new. And part of this, of course, rolls into the limitations. What can you expect of your students, their parents, and the technical capacity? What competencies do they have in this subject area? Particularly when we start thinking about research, we often end up in new or slightly adjacent curriculum areas or subject areas to what students are accustomed to. We're going to think a bit more about pedagogical choices here in a minute, so we'll come back to that. And the thing that Kylie, I think, is going to spend a fair bit of time thinking about with you all is, what are those data that you or the students would need to help answer the question? Because those data needs are what we will use Survey123 to help answer. Charlie, can we look at the next slide, where we really want to take a look here at one possible framework for understanding the design of instruction inside of a project-based model. And again, it begins with asking a question. Asking a question, in this case, it has a geographic component. We're going to utilize a geographic information system and a Survey123 instrument that is chock full of support and capacity for not just collecting geographic data, but also making sense of it. Beyond that, students acquire data. Again, is something Kylie will walk through us with, and exploring that data, beginning to make sense out of it. And then we move into analyze. And I don't know that we're going to get too deep into analysis this evening, but we'll get some hints at it. And then finally, at least in this particular model, there's a stage of ACT, which it can be any type of assessment or work product performance, maybe even a letter to your city council. ACT is a result of what they learned in this research process. Let's take a look at the next one, Charlie. Finally, we want to highlight some things that hopefully everybody has been thinking about for months now. But in the context of project-based learning, it makes sense to call these out because it's a little different of an environment for us, right? In many places, kids are either learning full or part-time still through digital video-based instruction. A lot of students are sitting in Zoom day and night. What kind of affordances do we have? What are the new opportunities there? Well, obviously kids can have, in some cases, more access to smartphones and other sophisticated devices for collecting data. A lot of times those have cameras on them, which can be very powerful tools as a part of our project-based learning exercise. Of course, when kids are learning from home, in a lot of cases, they also have access to green space right outside their back door. And it may not be a massive space, but if they have a tree in the yard, or if they have a garden in the yard, they have all kinds of places teeming with life for example, that would facilitate a bio-based research project that kids could easily go out and collect data for. And of course, the last another affordance is this idea that simply because kids are working from home, they're automatically geographically distributed across some part of your town or community. So this can be very powerful if you're trying to understand, say, something as simple as weather. As a front moves through town, you can have students record the temperature in the shade, and you have them recorded each hour, and you can watch that weather front as it moves through town. This phenomena, or rather this ability to measure across the geographic proximity, is really the cornerstone of value in terms of why you would want to be able to use something like Survey123 or GIS to really study a question of interest. Finally, of course, what's the new constraint? Well, the new constraint is everything that's an affordance may in fact not even exist. There may be variables going on that you as educators or informal educators will know, of course, and you know right now what you can and cannot rely on. So it's a good news, bad news situation, like a lot of things were in 2020. But there's something to think about and opportunities, hopefully, that you can take advantage of. Charlie?
All right, I think it's time for us to think about the tool that we can use with which to gather data, and we'll come back and you'll be able to hear some things about this even as Kylie is doing a presentation about this. Be able to think about this in terms of gathering data very locally or gathering data more geographically distributed. So Kylie, if you're ready, I think it's all yours.
Great, Charlie. Thanks. All right, let me make sure my screen's getting shared. Check out if it's working for you guys. Awesome. It looks like you guys are seeing right now my browser looking at ArcGIS Survey123. So this is one of the most popular tools in education for doing some data collection with students. And as Tom was talking about, this can be data collection of weather and patterns and things that they're observing in their own world that can be their own observations. It could also be through interviews or other discussions with other people. There's quite a range of things you can apply this to. But ultimately, what we want to do here is help these kids become better data consumers and data evaluators. So I'm going to jump in and we're going to look at making a survey. Now, I do want to mention that Esri does have other apps for data collection. You may have heard the name Collector or Quick Capture or Field Maps. Now, in the handout that's been provided, there is link number 6 in there. It does talk about these different apps and when you may want to use each one. We've chosen to look at Survey123 today because it's the most popular in K-12. So for those of you, and it was 50% who haven't used this yet and 17%, right, who aren't sure what Survey123 is. What Survey123 is a data collection app. And think of it like Google Forms with a map. So let's go take a look. We're going to go ahead and make a new survey now. And when we do this, we can pick how we want to get started. And I'm just going to start from scratch. And today, we're actually going to look at shoes. And we're going to give it a tag so that our system likes it. We're just going to create our survey. So what Survey123 is doing is setting up everything you need to do your data collection project. For those of you familiar with ArcGIS, things like a layer that houses your data, all of that's being spun up for you. And now we're ready to go. So you'll see it is, like I mentioned, Google Forms with a map. It's a drag and drop experience. And in fact, I find often that teachers are the ones that have a little bit of trouble getting going with how to use this, and the kids come in and just fly. They start adding what they want. Good news, bad news. Of course, that means they're not necessarily thinking, as Tom was saying, about the design of this project and this survey, but they're able to use the tool successfully. So let's look a little bit at this tool. All right, so today we're going to look at shoes because most of us have feet and they make for a convenient topic when we are distributed. Now, shoes, you might say, we need a geographic component. Well, the nice thing about people is by nature, we all have a location. And so, again, as Tom was mentioning, in this remote learning scenario, which we're doing right now, you can use that to your benefit and see patterns across, in this case, wherever you guys are listening from. So let's get started. The first thing, of course, I want to know in my survey is the type of shoes you have on. Now, when you think about the type of shoes you have on, you might word it differently than I do. So one choice I have, and we're thinking about, again, how we're going to use this data, is I can bring in some text. And I can ask you, what type of shoes are you wearing? And that's pretty important, so we'll make it required. But let's think about this for a minute. If I was to ask Charlie what type of shoes he was wearing, he might say athletic shoes. If I ask Tom, he might say tennis shoes. If I ask Barbary, she might say sneakers. Right now, these are all strings that basically for points of this would mean the same thing. When I'm done, the way I ask these questions are going to determine the data that's provided to me. And I am going to have to take that data and, like Tom was talking about, find meaning in it. I would really rather not have to look at the data and try to choose who was meaning the same type of thing. So I don't want to let you enter a string. Instead, I'm going to let you make a single choice. Now, one thing to note, there is a single choice and a multiple choice. In general, the single choice is the way you want to go. And think of it as single choice of answer, where multiple choices you can choose B and C. It just gets a little bit more complicated when you have to process it. So I find that where I can, a single choice question is a good way to go. And we're going to go ahead and put in a title here. And I've already made a list, and I don't want to type it again. So I'm going to teach you guys one of my favorite tricks in Survey123, which is this little batch edit button. Now, I could go in here and type boots, what else? Maybe sandals, right? And type all the choices. But I already have made a list. So I'm just going to come in here, delete what's been put in the list for me, and paste my list. When I say OK, you'll see it just gets populated in there for me. This saves me having to type it again and clicking through all the options. Now, either way works. And if I put them in the wrong order, I can drag and reorganize these. And I've made my list. Now, something you can do in your survey is mark what questions are required. And what that means is that when someone's filling out your survey, they can't click the submit button. It won't even be enabled unless they've answered those questions. Now, sometimes you need to use this a little bit sparingly. If everything in your survey is required and it's 10, 20 questions, some people are going to get bored or annoyed or tired of doing it and close the survey and go on their way. So you really want to think about what questions you need to have answers for. And that, again, is going to come back to that project you've defined, like Tom was talking about. In this case, what I am looking at is styles of shoes. If you don't want to answer this question, I am fine with you closing my survey and not filling it out because I need to know this one. So I'll go ahead and mark it as required. You'll see the little red star appears. And that's how you can scan and see that you've marked it appropriately. All right, let's add some more stuff in here. The rest of this is interesting information, but I'm not going to require an image. I'd love to see the shoes you have on today if you'd like to share it. So we're going to, again, give it a title and add it to our form. The next thing I'm curious about is, okay, let's go with shoe size. Again, I need to think about how I might want that information. Do I want to allow everyone to type it in? Some people might spell out 7, S-E-V-E-N. Some people might pick the number. Some people might put between a 7 and a 7.5, right? Again, I just want a simple answer here. I'm not concerned with exactly how precise the number you provided your shoe size is. So I'm going to go ahead and use a number. And again, we'll give a label so that the people filling it out know what they're answering. And I'm going to make it an integer. Now, I know shoe sizes aren't always whole numbers, but just to make my life easier, I'm going to have people round it off. Again, I'm thinking about how I might want to use this data in the end. And what I'm trying to do is design my survey in a way that makes not only makes it possible for me to get my ideal or best data, but really forces people to give it to me. I'm just limiting what they can tell me. Okay, there are some times though that a string is appropriate. For example, if I want to know what brand, I don't want to make a list of every shoe brand, and I know someone will come up with one I haven't listed, so I'm just going to let you enter it. And of course, when we're using Survey123, the reason we have picked this tool is because we can add a mapping component. And so we're going to put a map on into our survey. This gets a little bit, I wouldn't say tricky, but something you need to think about with students, especially when they're working remotely. I've titled this roughly Where Are You? And that's intentional. Some students or their parents may not be comfortable, and even teachers, adults, with exact locations being recorded in your data. Why do you need to know exactly where I am? Why does my browser ask me what my location is? And these are valid questions. I usually say roughly where are you, and then give some kind of guidance. In this case, I only need to know roughly what city you're in. So I'm going to advise people, like, go ahead and put the pin on your city. Now, some other strategies with students, it can be place the pin at the nearest intersection, right? So it's not right on your house, but it's in the general area, and that can be good when we are dealing with things like temperature passing through the city, or through your city, like Tom was talking about. Okay, so once we have all these things in here, let's see, I do want to make this required, right? Because the reason I'm doing a survey is I really care about the mapping part. So I've set up the things that I want in it, and I'll take a look through it, and I can actually preview it, and let's see what my survey will look like. And it takes a second, it's spinning it up, getting it all ready for me, and now I can see what it'll look like, how it'll work, choices that people can make, what they'll be able to do. Okay, I can browse to my picture, or I can take one with my camera, fill out the brand. Let's make sure if I try to type my 7.5, nope, doesn't let me type in the half, good. So it lets you take a quick look that things are good. I'm gonna go ahead and close that preview, and I'm pretty happy with this survey. So while there is more I can do, I'm gonna go ahead and publish it. Now, when I publish it, what it's gonna do is take all this information and wrap it up and share it so that that layer, that container in ArcGIS Online, if you're familiar with that term, is ready to use. Now, if you're not familiar with that term, don't worry. One of the great things about using Survey123 is it is handling all of that for you. So kind of the details of what's under the covers here becomes a little bit less important at this point. All right, the reason you want to publish is that when you were working on this, it was just kind of an idea in your head. And now I've published it, it's a real thing, but I haven't shared it with anyone yet. So right now, I'm gonna go ahead and switch to the Collaborate tab. When you've made a survey, by default, you'll notice who can submit to it. Well, right now I can. So that might be okay. This might be a survey that I'm creating to fill out in the classroom, and maybe I'm having students come up one at a time or working with them in breakout rooms in Zoom, right? And we're doing this together where I'm the one clicking the buttons and I don't need anyone else to be able to fill it out. Today though, I want you guys to get to fill it out. So I can go ahead and check everyone and save it. Now this is submitting. So one important thing to notice is that when you're working with Survey123, you can control separately who can fill out your survey and who can see the results in your survey. Again, when working with students, this can become very important. Things that are shared publicly, if everyone can see the results, there's a lot of privacy concerns there, and even not with minors, right? All of us have privacy concerns. So usually when you're doing a survey, I try to make it the smallest group of people possible and still get the job done. In this case, I would probably say members of my organization, which would mean my coworkers like Tom and Charlie. I would let them see the results. But not everyone needs to see it. I'll be sharing my screen. We're not going to have you guys explore the results of this on your own. Okay, and again, you can save that. Now, what I want to do now is take a moment and let you guys actually try this out. So I'm not going to go to this exact survey though, and simply because I wanted to have some dashboards and just ways you can look at this data available to work with you guys without you having to watch me make all of those parts. So I'm going to go back to my surveys, and I'm going to go to this shoes one that I made earlier and open that one up, just so you can see what we're doing here. So You can see it's basically the same one we just created. One difference, right? I get tired of the green survey. It's great. It's the default. It works. I put a pretty picture in the background just to have fun and some different colors. When we go to the Collaborate tab, the way that you can share this with people, again, it's shared with everyone, but how do they get to it? Well, I can copy the URL and I could put that into the chat. And in fact, let me see. Let me get that pasted there so it can be shared with you guys if you want to access it that way. I could also open it in a new tab if I'm filling it out myself. So here we get the survey in the web browser. And another one here that I'm going to bring up for a minute. There's a QR code. I'm going to leave this visible on the screen for a minute because those of you who have a smartphone handy and you want to fill out my survey, go ahead and take your smartphone. On an iPhone, an Android phone, if you just use the camera and hold it up as like you're going to take a picture, it actually will read the code. And like on iOS, you'll see a notification appeared of, do you want to go to this website? And when you go ahead and tap that, it'll bring you to the browser window. So again, I'm going to leave this up for a second so that we have time to fill out the survey. And again, it's a quick, fun one. It's just to give you guys an idea of the type of data you can collect. And so that you could kind of hear the reasoning about why I picked different types of things for the fields. While mentioning that, I'm also going to mention that that comes back again to what Tom was talking about design, right? And this backwards design. So you may have noticed while I was creating the survey, I would say things like, well, I know that I want an easy to process or an easy to use number or something that I can look at and know what it means. I don't want to give you too much opportunity to be creative, I would say. Creativity has its place, but when I need to process your data, I would rather you are not creative. So I'm going to go ahead now, switch over, and for those of you who aren't filling it out, we'll go ahead and look at it together. So this looks at, our survey. What kind of shoes do you have on right now? Well, I tend to be working at home in socks these days. And I can come on down here and I can go, and I'm going to select an image file simply because I'm working on a device that doesn't have a great camera to use for this. So I've gone ahead and picked my picture. I can add in my shoe size. I'm going to skip brand because I don't have any on. And then I can use the map. So I have choices here. One choice is I can pan around, I can zoom in, I can come find my city, or I can just type it. Go ahead and zoom there and it places the pin, and that's good enough for this. If I wanted to be more precise, I could click exactly where in the city I am, but I'm not worried about that today. Okay, so I'm going to take this and I'm going to go ahead and I will submit. Now I'm going to go ahead and pretend I'm submitting it again. And the reason I want to do that is just I did mention while we were creating it that if you don't answer my required questions, you'll be prevented from continuing. And just so we can see that right here, if I try to submit, it says no. You have some errors and you can see what they are. Correct them and go to the next one. All right, I'm not going to submit that one. I'm going to instead jump back, to Survey123. So this is, as you saw a minute ago, where we went ahead and designed our survey. It's also where we configured it for collaborating. Who could fill it out? Who could see the results? And there's some other tabs I want to look at now. Analyzing and data. Well, as Tom said, we're not just collecting data. We also want to make sense of it. Just having the data isn't powerful. It's what you do with it. So let's check out what we can see and analyze. Now, this is where some of those types that we picked are really going to come in. Wow, great. A bunch of you have filled this out. It's fun to see. Socks are pretty popular and no shoes. Slippers. You can kind of tell what kind of year this is by seeing the popular choices here. All right, so since we picked a single choice question where you had to pick one of my answers, we get a nice chart of it. We can see how many people. We can also see the percentage of that down here below. And we can see a summary of our pictures. These are great. I love it. You can tell I filled it out twice with my dot socks there. All right, and we have size. This one might be a little less useful here. It knows it's a number, so it's grouping it together for us. Wow, we have some big ones, and this is a great one. I want to talk about that for a second. So, why are most people size under 17? We have a couple that are higher. Well, these are the kind of things you have to think about while you're designing your survey. So I didn't say US shoe size. I just said shoe size. So what that meant to different people was different things. So I probably need to be a bit more specific when I'm designing that survey and put in something like, what is your US shoe size? And maybe even a link so that people who don't know their US shoe size can convert between a European shoe size to US and things like that. But that's a great point. We are doing our best to control the data. But even sometimes when we are doing our best, we need to look at that data and think critically about if the answers we're getting make sense. For a string, again, there's not too much that we can do. There's question mark was a popular one. Great, we have Converse, Brooks, great running shoes. I like these choices. Socks, again, very popular. So you can see we don't have quite the statistical approach of this, but we do have a fun response here that we can look at, and we can kind of see what was popular because the size of the words is contributing or is based on the popularity. So we could also jump in and look at the actual data. Still in Survey123, I can see a map. I can see where people are submitting this data from. We can come in here a little bit and check it out. And we can see the actual answers. All right, casual shoes, socks only, brands of shoes. We can look at the data. So this is great. This lets us do kind of a first pass at our data. Okay, we noticed some weird things in analyzing at the shoe size, right? We've seen kind of the geographic distribution on this map. I kind of want to see more. So I can put these into a map, and I'm actually going to jump to somewhere where you're going to see a map and some other stuff. Now, right now, it's based on how this was before I started. And you know what? I forgot to check a box that's going to make it refresh nicely. So I'm going to go ahead and reload this page so that it gets all of your data in. Now, there is a checkbox that should do this for me. I missed it, so I have to refresh today. And you can see the same information. But now, look at our map. So if we look at the map we were seeing a minute ago, here in Survey123, we have red dots, and we can see the geographic distribution of things. But in order to learn anything about this particular red dot, I click on it, and it shows me which one it is and some information. But in this map, we have some different colors. And if I open the legend here, you can see the colors are corresponding to the styles of shoes. So at a glance, I can do a little bit better visual analysis because I have more information in front of me on this map. Now I took it even further and took that map and placed it into a dashboard. And with it, I got information like, how many pieces of data do we have? And here's a list of some of the most recent ones. Here's a chart, similar to what you were seeing in Survey123, right? But a little bit different. And there's more you can put in here. We don't, as Tom said, have time to go into the vast variety of even this level of analysis of taking the data and building some charts. Maybe you want a pie chart to see the percentages of the different types of shoes. Those are all things you can do here. And you could even run an analysis tool on it. Maybe you want to see if you can find more advanced patterns. So once you're gathering your data in Survey123, one of the nice things is you're putting it right into ArcGIS. And once it's in ArcGIS, you have that full powerful suite of tools that you can use to make sense of that data, right? To make more of it than just a dot on the map. For example, we're not going to get quite into analysis tool, but perhaps we wanted to look at the weather. And let me make sure this is saved, and I do need to refresh, or I can go ahead and set it up so that it will refresh correctly from here on out. All right, and let's go ahead and refresh it to bring all your guys' dots onto the map. Now what you'll see is I've taken some other data that's available in Living Atlas about current weather, and I've taken your shoes and overlaid it. So in this case, perhaps I'm trying to find a relationship between these different things. Now let's look at the legend to make sure we know what we're looking at with the weather. Because weather, right, it could be wind speed, it could be humidity, and in this case, you'll see air temperature. So the darker color is a higher temperature. So I might expect things like sandals are more popular right now, where it was a higher temperature today. Boots might be more popular in some of the colder areas. And these are kind of conclusions you can use your map to draw by taking your data and, as a next step, mixing it up with some other data. So again, this is going to come back to what your project was, right? So you designed a project, you had a question in mind. You've collected some data to help answer that question. And you can take that data you've collected and combine it with other pieces of information available and analysis tools, and really start to just make sense of that data. Make it more than it was before by building an understanding and starting to answer that project question with it. All right. That's what I have to share today. A quick look at Survey123, how you build a survey, the experience of filling out a survey, and a few quick things we might do with that data. So I hope this has given you some ideas and for things you might want to try building projects around, whether they're simple, silly, and fun like this one, or maybe more interesting or more specific to the field that you're interested in.
That's great, Kylie. And so if I can now jump back to my screen, what I want to do is to point to an example that people can see where students have used data collection and map making and then storytelling to present their research project. We have had a competition for high school and middle school students in the US since 2017. So this is the 5th year of it. And it is an opportunity for students, either solo or in a team of 2, to do a project. They have to assemble some data. Sometimes they generate their own data. It is local data that they're working on. Sometimes they're gathering data from other sources, but they're working on data. They present their analysis to the school. School sends their best ones to the state. The state sends their best ones to Esri, and we get to present those. Along the way, the top 5 from high school in each participating state and the top 5 from middle school in each participating state each win $100. So that's a really exciting thing for a lot of students. Incentivizes them to say, great, how do I participate? And other countries could do some similar things. And there are different ways that people are handling these, but it's all around giving people the opportunity to do projects. I think about projects as sort of educational Velcro. It's the stuff that makes all of the work that you're doing stick. It just keeps it all, it makes things make sense when you have to wrestle with it. And that's what people do in these projects. So we did prepare a set of links for people, and that's the document that you can download. These are the same links. Just very quickly, there's the school's website. There's a document that you can access that gives you a ramped and scaffolded entry. And this is for the people, number 2, that's for the people who are just thinking about getting started. If you don't have access to log in and you've got a small group, a club, an educational pod, the GIS Club Kit is a good way to get some logins for the adults and the students, or the school bundle up there when you're dealing with a whole school. Number 4, Mapping Hour is a great set of videos to help people learn how to work with these things. And then Tom has collected a bunch of projects that are put together in the GeoProjects hub site. Kylie mentioned a story map that she put together about the different field data collection apps that exist in the ArcGIS suite of tools. Survey123 is the one that we find most educators using in schools. It seems to do the best job of handling what most people want to accomplish. There you can see in number 7, the competition, and then there are places where you can learn more and more about working with these tools over time. So we've got a lot of places for people to learn, to expand on these things. And it's not just the technology side of life. You get to see, why am I doing certain things in a certain way as you're going through some of these. We want people to understand those kinds of questions about, why would I do something? Or what about, and in fact, let me get my colleagues to join in here a little bit. There were some really good questions that people put in together beforehand. And one of the questions that I wanted to address was about devices. Can people do, Kylie, can people do what you were doing? Could they do that on a Chromebook? Could they answer it even on a Chromebook?
Yeah, so that's a great question. One of the nice things about what I was showing in Survey123 is everything I did was just in a browser. So if you have a device with a connection, you can do those things. Now, if you're working on a phone, it's a little bit trickier to create a survey, right? Just think about the real estate, the size you have to work with. But these are all devices that are supported.
Okay. There were probably some special questions that people were asking, and if our organizers want to ask some of them, especially, we'll do our best. If you want to ask some questions,
Sure.
Go ahead and type them in, and so we'll do our best.
Yeah, I'm noticing a fair number of questions, Charlie, about what's included with that school bundle. Someone mentioned story maps, somebody mentioned Survey123, obviously, but maybe we could talk briefly about what is included in those bundles you mentioned.
Sure, and the best place to see that is here at the esri.com/schools website, where you can go in and inspect what is in the school bundle. You can go to the pull down for the schools mapping software. Basically, if you think about ArcGIS Online as a framework that ties lots of things together, you get map viewer and scene viewer, the 2D and 3D viewer, and then the bundle also gives you data collection application, so you can have access to Survey123 and quick capture and field maps. There are tools for analyzing data, the dashboard. There are tools for presenting data, story maps. There are a couple of other elements that are in the standard package that everybody has access to. And so there are lots of tools built into that.
Mm-hmm.
The 5 that people use most often in schools are map viewer, scene viewer, Survey123, dashboard, and story maps.
Mm-hmm.
And if you master those, you're in great shape.
Awesome. So those accounts that you're talking about are organization accounts opposed to public accounts, I think. So someone was wanting a clarification that in order to use Survey123, that they did indeed need that kind of account. Just a free public account isn't quite enough.
Well, so Kylie made a survey, and to do that, she had to create it from inside an organization,
Mm-hmm.
and she had to have a certain level of privileges within that organization. Right. So once she shared it, then everybody could add data to it. But if you want to create it, and for the students who are working on a competition project, and they want to generate data, they want to generate their own special survey, they need to be inside an organization and with certain level of capacity, publishing privileges. And there's documentation that you'll see in number 2 when it's talking about, hey, we're getting ready for getting our organization. That's link number 14 in that number 2 document there that allows you to request it. But there are
Perfect.
items in there before that help.
Yeah. So I think maybe if Kylie doesn't mind, I've got 3 or 4 questions here that I think she could just show us really quickly.
I think I have the same couple written down, so let's go for it.
Okay, great. So we've got some questions about how to add a layer from the Survey123 or the data created over to a map in Map Viewer. And then there was more than one dazzled by the dashboard. So how,
Wonderful.
very quickly that process. Yep.
We'll just do a really quick look at those.
Perfect.
So the first thing I mentioned a couple times as we were creating our survey, right, that what it was really doing behind the scenes was creating a thing in ArcGIS. And for those of you who knew what it was called a layer. So what I'm going to do is I'm switching tabs, and here is the my content of my organization where I was working. So you can see I have my shoes form here in one of the folders. Now Survey123 creates a folder for you that's named survey hyphen and your folder name. In that folder, it puts those layers or bundles of data, I think of them as, that it's creating. The main one is the shoes one. Now you get these other ones for field worker and stakeholder. What those are is just different permissions based on the same data. Okay, so all of them are pointing at your same bunch of data, but the field worker can't see all the answers, right? Because we didn't want them seeing all the answers. So that's why you end up with a couple different what's called layers, or just piles of data, little folder of data, right? Or clump of data. Now to put that into a map, you have a few ways you can do it. One is you can go in, and I usually use the stakeholder one because that means the people I want seeing the answers. And when you click on that, you go to an item detail page, which gives you information about that layer. And from there, you can open it in the map viewer. Okay, another way you can do this is from the map itself. So when you're here on a map, you can go ahead and add data. And when you search, by default, you'll be in your own content and your newer things first. So it makes it really easy when you've just created a survey to go ahead and hit the add button and bring that data or that layer into your map. Now, that was my demo one, so I'm going to remove it because as we noticed, I didn't use that after you actually fill it out. I used the shoes one. So let me get the correct layer so we can see our data. Okay, so now we've made that map. What you would do next, save your map. We'll call that my new shoe map. Oh yes, I need a tag. Sorry about that. Add that in there. And the reason I'm doing this is so that you guys can see the dashboard process. Now there are a couple different ways, again, that you can do that. One is from that item details page, there were options. One is that you can go into share here and you can choose to create a web app, and dashboard's an option. Now I'm going to show you the way I tend to do it. I tend to make my map and go back to my organization. Often I'll go back to my content like we were seeing a minute ago, so let me get there. I like to go to dashboard here. This little dots icon, it's a grid icon. We'll often call it the app switcher. What's cool is in there, you'll see all the different apps you have access to based on your account. And one of those will be dashboards. When you have a dashboard or create one, you come in here and you see your content. And you can go ahead and create a dashboard. Give it a title and a tag, a summary, those other things. I like to stick it in the same folder just because I find that helps me remember where it is. And you click create dashboard and you get a blank screen. With dashboard, it's super easy to pull in a map. Here's my new shoe map. We'll use the one that we just created. So you'll see all red dots. It's not changed. You get to choose. Can people zoom in on your maps? Do they want a legend? And we're going to insert that map. And then you can add the other things. So when you pick, for example, the indicator where we showed how many people had filled it out, it tells you what layers you have pulled in here from your map. You can pick your layer, and it's decently smart about the defaults. Now, maybe instead I want the average. Well, that doesn't really make sense right now. Then we need to pick what field. Okay, average shoe size. And we can do things like add a title. And then say done. So it's a similar process to that when you want to add a list, a chart, those other things. You can see there's quite a range of them here. And you pick them and you'd be able to choose that layer and then go ahead and configure. And here you can see it starts it with just the dots and you pick the rest of the information you want displayed. So the one other question I actually noticed coming through the chat, Barbara, if you don't mind, I'm going to jump to one more here.
Yep.
And
Go ahead.
that was a question about being able to export the data to a spreadsheet or something like that. So I just wanted to point out when you're here on this item page for your layer. So again, how I got here, I was in the content and I'm in the folder that Survey123 created, and I pick my layer that Survey made, right? Now, this one that just said hosted is the true layer of everything, the special magical one. The field worker and stakeholder, again, have some different permissions on it. So when I'm working on my own, I'm going to use this parent layer, just the main one. And you can see there's export data. And you can pick different types of things that you would like to grab it as. So for example, we could export it to Excel. Hey, I need to be careful because of the editing. That's fine. Give it the information and I'd be able to export that. All right, and then I'm going to turn it over. Any other questions we wanted to look at?
No, I think that's great. Very good. So we do have some questions about IDs and some other specific things regarding accounts and some of those sorts of things. So Charlie, I'm going to pass that back over to you. I know that your team is really good at getting back with folks on some of these specific questions. So I know that there are some things here. Folks are at a Google school and needing advice on getting different tools other than Google specific tools into their school. Some of those kinds of things. So I'm going to encourage the team to reach out to you individually because there are maybe some specifics that you'll need. Yeah.
Yeah. And if people didn't get to ask their question or they don't get it answered right away, they want to follow up, they can reach the three of us at schools@esri.com. And this is what we're here for. So we want to answer those kinds of questions.
Awesome. And we did have a number of people talking about different experiences that they were having on different devices as they were answering the survey. So Charlie, maybe you could share with us some of your experiences in terms of maybe a best device or some tips and tricks on different types to know about on different devices to make things work more easily.
Generally, what I tell people is it's going to work best if you practice on it a couple of times. It takes a little getting used to, especially when you're on a phone. If the first time you're working with something is when you're actually out in a project and it's essentially sort of mission critical, that's not the time to be learning to use the device on this process. And so I encourage people, do practice runs. We're going to create just like Kylie did, we'll create a 3-question survey and see how it works on our phones. Typically what happens is that people aren't accustomed to responding in a certain way, but after they do it 2 or 3 or 4 times, then they say, oh, I get this. You got to click on this and then you got to swipe that. And okay, so this is the sequence. That's what people, generally speaking, find is that it just takes a couple of times getting used to it. It's not quite like driving a stick shift car, but it's like driving a smaller car when you're accustomed to a bigger car.
Yeah.
There's one other thing
Awesome.
I'd like to add to what Charlie said there, which is one thing to keep in mind is when you're using the tools like Survey123, and there's been a couple questions about dashboards and things like that as well. Pretend you're one of your students. Go in and just poke the buttons, make a survey, play with it. You're not limited in the number of surveys you can make, so don't worry that you're using up opportunities that you can't get back later. Go in and push the buttons and see what you make.
And you know, along that line, you need to make sure that you're getting the account first. You're getting the logins to go in, and you got to have those logins, got to have the account set up. As I'm looking at some of the questions, people say, hey, I've gone to the Survey123 site and it's not working the way I want it to. Got to have that login at the right level.
Right. Well, folks, we are out of time this evening, but rest assured, we are keeping all these questions and comments in a very safe place, and we'll pass that on to the talented team here with us this evening. They are really great, and we'll get back with you individually on specific questions that you have. And again, if you didn't get your question answered, or you thought, oh, I've got one other question, jot down that email, schools@esri.com. That will get your message to this fine team. So thanks again, Charlie, Tom, and Kylie. We really appreciate you sharing your expertise this evening. And thank you to our audience. We appreciate your comments on our survey on the way out. Keep an eye on your inbox. We'll be in touch with a certificate, a link to the recording so you can watch it again and again. And we hope that you will have a great evening, a good rest of the week, and tell a friend about Directions and Esri. See you later.